Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Journey to Healing. I am Jon Uhler, and we are doing a continuous deep dive into the topic of boundaries. And as I've mentioned before, that if you have been going to therapy for any length of time, if you're thinking about it, or if you have been and thinking about going back, the question is, to what extent has your therapist been dealing with or has dealt with the issue of boundaries in your life? Boundaries ultimately are the key to being able to help things calm down in the current day situation so that you can begin to make progress in your life. But if you have people that are crossing your boundaries, you're going to find it very difficult to make progress, and you're going to find yourself frustrated. But if you're like most people, you aren't totally aware of what you're feeling, so what you will experience is stress. And that's why I asked the opening question, how is your stress level? We're really doing an overall study of the issue of grief and loss, but a big portion of that subject has to do with boundaries, because if I cannot bring things down to a low ebb in my current life, I will never be able to tackle the things that maybe are unfinished in the past. So boundaries really are the key to everything. And from a Christian perspective, that's why Jesus placed such emphasis on the issue of ensuring that we are not trespassing against one another. We have used Jesus' words from Matthew chapter 7, verse 6 as a significant point of reference to understand the importance of boundaries. 2,000 years ago, he emphasized that we should not be dealing with pigs, the pigs in our life. And we have dealt with that extensively. And again, he was not calling names. He was using a term that would have gotten people's attention to let them know that they have people in their lives that they shouldn't have, and they don't get any brownie points for having those people in their lives, and that is not the cross they need to bear. So to bring yourself up to speed, because we're going to hit the ground running again tonight, to bring yourself up to where we are and look at the context and to understand a lot of what we're going to be talking about, I recommend going to SurvivorSupport.net under the podcast tab, and you will find an ever-growing repository of past programs. Spend the time. I encourage you to invest the time, especially if you're one of my clients. I encourage you, take the time to go back, scroll all the way down to the beginning of when I began to record these programs, and work your way through, because we're heading somewhere. And you will save, whether you're one of my clients or whether you are in therapy, you will save months worth of sessions, quite frankly, if you really ingest the information that I'm giving. Why? Because so much of what we deal with inevitably comes down to the issue of boundaries and what happens when they're crossed. We mentioned last time that you pretty much can take all the mental health issues, all the psychological issues that we deal with, and just shy of organic issues, which means something to do with the brain itself. So you can have inherited illnesses, the brain being an organ, or through a traumatic brain injury, or something to do with the brain. So just shy of that. But that really is the minority, generally speaking, of people that seek out counseling. The majority of people have issues that are under the surface, and they need to begin to kind of excavate a little bit to find out what is going on. Because if they cannot speak the truth in love, if they cannot be honest, if they cannot serve as iron sharpening iron, if they cannot spur one another on to loving good works, it means they are not free. If I'm in a relationship where I cannot be honest, then I'm not in a real relationship. How do I know? Because the person doesn't know you, and you probably don't know the other person. Okay, you may know the other person, but what's causing you to hesitate from really being honest? Maybe because you know the other person. And so all the more then, it's high time to be honest. Because how long are you going to maintain this ruse? How long are you going to tiptoe around in this, what amounts to a facade of a relationship where you're just going through the motions? And how many families does that apply to? We're coming up on the holidays, Many people that I deal with, are not looking forward to the holidays. Why? Because they aren't looking forward to the people they're going to be around. And so the question is, why are they going to be around those people? Out of obligation, out of a sense of guilt, neither of which are good reasons. We may be long overdue in speaking truth. And trust me, better go it alone. Meaning better to go it alone. Better to have fewer people in your life than settle for people that are going to be disrespectful, that are going to be self-injurious, that are going to be pigs, that are going to take what you have to give, your pearls. Jesus said, do not cast your pearls before swine. Why? Because they will add insult to injury. They will take your pearls, and again, past podcasts, if you go back and look at some of those, especially the warthog assessment, if you want to find out whether or not you, me, or someone else qualifies as a pig, there's a good assessment there. But we are commanded not to have pigs because something very predictable will happen, and it is unproductive pain. I don't go anywhere fast. I don't get any brownie points. I will just be spinning my wheels, experiencing a lot of pain for no good reason. And so if I have people in my life that are detrimental, then something predictable will happen. They will take my pearls, they'll take my time, effort, energy, and resources, and they will do what with them? They'll trample them, they'll treat them as nothing, and then what will they do? They will now turn on me. They'll add insult to injury. That is not love, and that is not patience. That doesn't qualify for any of the correct criteria by which maybe Galatians 5, fruit of the Spirit. I am not exercising the fruit of the Spirit when I'm in the mud with the pigs. That is not, it doesn't qualify. So it's self-imposed. So it is very important to make sure I'm not rolling around in the mud with a pig, and that I'm not excusing away or allowing somebody else to excuse that away. In Ephesians 5, chapter 5, verses 6 through 9, you will find that Paul says, do not, and he's talking to those that are inclined to excuse the pigs. Okay? Paul says, don't even allow those people to excuse the pigs. So now we have sort of co-facilitation of piggishness all over the place. So in counseling, we might call that the enabler or the rescuer. So we're not only not supposed to deal with pigs, but we're not supposed to deal with those that are going to make excuses for pigs. The only thing that happens when you excuse away a pig is you give them a longer leash to break out of their pen and do what? Cause everybody misery. So do not co-facilitate a pig, and do not tolerate those that are driven to make excuses for it. Why? Because they are then turning a blind eye, not a healthy eye. They're turning a blind eye to emotional hurtfulness, emotional irresponsibility that is perpetrating oppression and injustice. And I've probably spoken to quite a few families just now. So for fear of, and here's where you can see now the issue of boundaries falls under the topic of grief and loss. For fear of someone experiencing the loss of what they've been working for or hoping for, understandably, we all want family, but if it comes at a price, that is not a family. That is a ruse. That is, somebody's got a system and they're working the system. A family does not benefit only one member. That is a cult. That is a detrimental situation, and we are called to have discernment to figure out the right amount of grace and truth, and to what extent we should be interacting with those around us. And we've been talking about, as we are dealing with, or if we deal with people that are detrimental, people that are selfish pigs, what will happen is they will bring us down not only to their level, but they're going to begin to move us into what I've been calling the fog. And we looked at that extensively over the past number of past number of weeks. But let me start by, again, clarifying, what are we not talking about? Now, again, I recommend go back and listen to some of the past podcasts. But again, just to help ease anybody's mind that may recently be joining us, we are not talking about, when we talk about pigs, okay, and again, it's not a pejorative term. We're not calling names. We are describing something. We're using Jesus's words. He also called those same people dogs. So these these terms are all the same. A pig, a dog, a fool. The Old Testament term for fool is not how we use it in the modern day. It's not a minor thing. Psychology comes along, and we would call that a white-collar psychopath. That is not a minor thing, and people can morph into that. It's neither nature or nurture, or not even abuse, as we're going to begin to see. Psychopathy is the result of hardening of conscience, where you end up with no remorse and no empathy. No empathy. That is the basis of a psychopath. 2,000 years ago, there was an old term. It was a metallurgy term, and we have looked at that, and that is called a reprobate mind. And a reprobate mind, once it's given over to self, and that's before it gets into anything, let's say, to deal with sexual deviance. Before somebody gets into sexual deviance, something has already happened on the inside of them, and they have basically morphed into the king of their castle and the center of the universe, so they have become a black hole kind of a person. We call that a narcissist. And there are different degrees of narcissists. You have kind of simple all the way to profound, and then if someone continues to morph, they will then move into the realm of sociopathy. A sociopath is all about self, but they are not all about going to war. Ultimately, that's a psychopath. So the best way to view it, as we have, and I'll bring up a slide from a previous podcast. Again, I recommend you go and you look at some of the podcasts that we've done. I'm going to bring my little picture up here. So we've looked at a number of kinds of relationships that are uneven. And again, what do we mean by uneven? We mean that, and I'm going to bring it up again. Here's our little guy that is carrying his load. We've got a knapsack there, and we are called to carry our own load. What does that mean? That in the Greek word, the old-fashioned Greek word for that's translated in the English load, meant a knapsack. And what is in that knapsack? It's more than just paying the bills. It is how we treat one another. And that comes out of Proverbs chapter 1 and chapter 2. If we pray for wisdom, we will know what is right, just, and fair. If you are on a deserted island by yourself, you never have to pray for wisdom. You have to pray for rescue. Or maybe you're okay and you'd never want to be rescued. But if you're by yourself, you don't need wisdom. So wisdom presupposes that I have other people in my life that is different than a burden. A burden, again, is something that, because I live in a fallen world, I have not invited this upon myself. It has nothing to do with my responsibility. So it's the result of living in a fallen world or living with others. And it can have to do with, very much, can have to do with other people's responsibility. Now, that is very different than what happens when I end up allowing people to emotionally freeload. Okay, this is not a burden, and this is not carrying my cross. This is, as we move through life, we end up carrying everybody else's baggage, so to speak. So we talked about last time how we should have relationships that remain on the path. So there's our little path. And that is, and you see those people, they are carrying their responsibility. And that is a healthy relationship that is moving onward and upward. And there will be times, as we've mentioned before, that the going may be tough. Let me see if I can get my picture out of there, but everybody probably has a picture of the picture. There we are. So here's a man and woman that are helping one another. That is not a codependent relationship because in this case, both of them have their responsibility. There are times where it will even get more difficult. And so we need to be able, again, to get outside of ourselves and reach out and help someone. But you notice, as much as she's struggling, she still has her knapsack on. It could be, there's our couple again, it could be a parent-child. But again, we are never to discard our responsibility. What usually ends up happening, though, is we end up feeling burdened by, or as we end up carrying somebody else's load, and that's where the term family baggage comes in. So again, we need to put that down. So if you feel like that, you then probably feel like that, and that comes from what? That comes from people ending up dumping their responsibility on you. But it can get even worse. So practically speaking, we end up feeling like that. Maybe I'll make it bigger. So there we go. So if you feel like you're under a pile, it's a similar experience. Again, here's our freeloading truck. Why does it feel that way? Because in one way or another, you have been pulled into the fog. Now, again, I recommend go back and look at some of the previous podcasts because you're going to understand this upside down scale, which really comes from us looking at, let me see if I can get it. And you notice there we are. There's a scale on the left-hand side. It is the correct way. We talked about if someone gets into a relationship that is negative, meaning you may be responsible, and you're probably overly responsible, but you have someone who is beginning to, let me find the fog here, is beginning to take you down into a valley, and that valley, here we are. So you're being taken for a ride, you're going into the valley, and what is down in that valley? There is nothing but pain. And little by little, incrementally, so if we take the idea of heading down into the valley with fog, and we invert it, so a different way of looking at this. So we're going deeper and deeper into the fog, and again, we've talked about this now for the past couple of podcasts, where a reasonable relationship should be incrementally in a terrace-like effect. That's a image out of China. You can see these different levels. Well, that's different character growth levels. But if I allow myself to start going downhill, what does that mean? That means somebody is taking me down there, because we should be having relationships that look like what? We should have relationships that are helping one another onto the highlands, where we are spurring one another on to love and good works. We want people to grow. We want to be able to have relationships that are healthy and each person carrying their own load. But what ends up happening is people start to become used to, as we talked about last time, they start to become used to carrying somebody else's responsibility, and then they meet other people in life, and there are a whole lot of selfish people in life, and what ends up happening, you end up carrying everybody's responsibility, and then what does that feel like? That feels like high stress. So that's where we left off last time. We talked about different kinds of relationships that can cause issues, and bringing my chart back here again. Sorry about that, right there. We added some other dynamics that happen at the same time. As someone starts to go level by level downward into the fog, we're with someone that will typically begin to morph. And so again, you can go back and review that podcast. We reviewed the 5 stages of emotional abuse and enslavement on the part of a manipulator, on the part of someone who is probably either currently morphing into an extremely selfish individual, or is already a selfish individual, and now they have been grooming you. They've been looking for someone to begin to work. And so you are ripe for falling into the hands of someone, as we looked at it before, someone who has been progressing downward. So you're dealing with a pig when you shouldn't. Look at -4. There is our pig. And again, while we're dealing with people that are moving downhill, or maybe already downhill, but we're not quite sure, so we're going to have a little bit of grace. But we're going to have more truth. So we're going to speak the truth in love. We're iron sharpening iron, spurring one another on to loving good works. And then if the person still doesn't turn around, so the presumption here is that I am being honest. And what's happening is the more truth I am speaking in a responsible fashion, then it's going to dispel all doubt. And so if the person doesn't turn things around on their own, because now I've let them know how they're affecting me, if that's not doing it, then we know it's dispelling all doubt. We know then it's moving from inadvertent to beyond habitual. Now it's willful. Because if somebody cares enough about the relationship, they will form a new habit. Will they not? And that's why, ladies, if you have any men that are into pornography, if they don't show a broken and contrite spirit, and if they don't do radical things to stop, that you may be dealing with someone, and you're likely dealing with someone that is very, very low on this level. And so I encourage you, after a very brief period of time, you need to think about what Proverbs 26, 27, and 28 talk about, because he's demonstrating he is a pig, he's a fool, and so you need to separate from him. You need to get distance. And what you will find out from that is whether or not he intends to turn things around in a very significant way. One of those is getting some serious counseling, and he needs to show by his track record. Talk is cheap. Do not listen to them. You're going to watch their actions, and that's true for any of us, right? We focus on the fruit of what's coming out of our lives. So if someone has been morphing downhill, again, we covered this, it's worth covering again, that if they're at about a -3.5, it's time to dust your sandals off. Do not get in the pig pen with them, meaning do not stay in that relationship in the same way. You need to separate. Why? Because the person, you don't know where they're at. So they're at least at, then if it's 3.5, it's very close. It's all subjective. And again, if you don't like my numbers, then come up with your own. This comes from my work in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections on psych staff for 11 years, working really hard to figure out what causes guys to become the way they have if they have repeatedly crossed boundaries. One thing you'll find is eventually the empathy goes away, the remorse goes away, genuine remorse, because their conscience is being becoming hardened. Okay, so they very likely, again, we'll just go through this very quickly, you don't know, and that's why you have to look at their behavior, because they may very well be past the point of unlikely return. That's when you need to dust your sandals off. They are possibly beyond the point of no interest in ever returning, and that's what's happening. They're losing the interest in being any other way. They may be beyond the point of only wanting more of the way it is. Beyond the point of viewing others with morals and ethics as chumps. Meaning that's exactly what starts to happen. They start to view it as sport to take advantage of you. They may be beyond the point of viewing others with morals and ethics with disdain. That starts to happen. There's a term, I didn't even know it's floating out there, so I thought it was original with me. Good to know that others have come up with the same term, but malignant sociopathy or narcissism. Malignant means they are, to some extent, they're going to do you harm because they have disdain towards you. They may be beyond the point of being driven to make an impression and leave a mark. That's the next level. Now they are driven to perpetrate harm. And then beyond the point of being driven to defile, that eventually, and somebody down at this level, especially a guy, he's probably into pornography. Okay, so there's something about defiling your innocence, defiling purity, defiling a clean conscience. They're driven to do that. And then point of being driven by the thrill of the game. This is a psychopath, by the way. And by having the last word, last say, and last laugh. So when you are dealing with someone that is at a low level, you don't know how far into the fog they are. And so all you know is somehow you are feeling stressed, and you're probably carrying other people's stuff as well. But the only way to deal with that ultimately is to begin to draw boundaries. Now, again, what are we talking about, or who are we talking about? Are we talking about just anybody? Does anybody qualify as a pig? No. There are some people that may be very difficult to deal with, but they're not pigs. And the one way you're going to find out is you're going to, again, begin to speak the truth. So we're not talking about difficult people, though somebody at that low level is certainly going to be that. But there are people that are difficult to deal with. But the question is this: have you been speaking truth to them? Have you been honest? Because somebody can be difficult, but the question is ultimately, do they have a conscience? If they do not have a conscience, then they're not just a difficult person. A difficult person has been someone that has become entrenched in a certain pattern, a certain way of being, but at some point in time, they should stop being difficult. If you say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, the question is this: how honoring of that person are you? Because you're equating them with an old dog. So they may be difficult at first. We bear with them, but we're always looking to help them grow. And if it gets to a point that they are not, then at the very least, we probably shouldn't be around them. But if they are down in the fog, they're actually going to, little by little, they're going to be morphing and revealing themselves to us. But at first, we're not talking about just difficult people. We're not talking about people with faults and quirks and rough edges. Here's an example. That would be Oscar the Grouch. Okay, everybody remember Sesame Street and Oscar. Now, a lot of people would say, well, Oscar's got an attitude. Correct. But he would fall into the category of maybe a difficult person, but probably somebody with some faults, quirks, and rough edges. What's the one thing you notice about Oscar? Here's the primary thing, right? Does Oscar ever move his garbage can near unsuspecting people? No, Oscar is typically pretty stationary. People end up getting around Oscar's garbage can. Well, and he doesn't like that, but then a lot of the times they actually knock on his lid, and that's when he comes out. So watch a few of those older episodes. I haven't seen Sesame Street in decades, but at least the ones that I recall decades ago, Oscar would be minding his own business, wanting to be left alone, and that's a key. So he is not overtly crossing people's boundaries. He just wants to be left alone. So Oscar would actually fall into the category of somebody with rough edges. And maybe we can kill him with kindness and he'll come around. But you notice, he doesn't go around other people. He wants to be left alone. Okay. How about Scrooge? Remember the movie Scrooge? Now, certainly if there was somebody that we must be talking about as far as a sociopath or a psychopath, it must be Scrooge. No. And so interesting, he was eligible for the angels, past, present, and future, to come and try to get his attention. Well, Scrooge was not a very nice man, correct? But did Scrooge screw anybody? I'm sorry, right? Did he get over on someone? No. He actually was a very hard-working businessman. Now, he wasn't very nice. That's a different issue. But we never see him going out and getting over on someone. Now, true, on Christmas Day, he was going to evict people, and I'm not and that's why the angels visited him. So he wasn't kind, but you notice he wasn't ripping people off. He just was not acting with mercy, but he wasn't transgressing anybody. So he was all justice. He needed to learn mercy, but that's why he was eligible to be forgiven, because in a strange sort of way, he wasn't trying to hurt people. Now, if you want to debate with that, send some messages and we'll talk more about that. Okay. Somebody who acts with ignorance, and the Apostle Paul was that. He said he was a blasphemer. He was not a nice person, but isn't it interesting that he was shown grace? So God's grace is amazing. Oftentimes, we're going to write people off long before God does. But the one thing about Paul, strangely enough, is he was not interested in being unjust. He actually thought, misguided though, he thought he was doing the right thing. We will continue looking at what is the difference between a prodigal and a predator on the other side of the break.
Are you or someone you know a survivor of abuse and wondering where to turn for trustworthy help and insight into the effects of such abuse? Ever wish you had access to a resource that could help you continue your progress in healing? SurvivorSupport.net is that resource. Developed by Jon Uhler, a seasoned therapist with years of experience working with sexual abuse survivors, SurvivorSupport.net is a one-of-a-kind resource to help you understand the impact of abuse and to help you understand the nature of those who harmed you, in order to help you gain clarity and continue healing. If you are interested in speaking with Jon Uhler about your situation, or in having Jon conduct a consultation or a training for your church or organization, SurvivorSupport.net serves as a convenient method of contacting him. Our program, Journey to Healing, is made possible through the generous donations of viewers like you. There are many opportunities and needs that Survivor Support is attempting to meet, and your monthly support or one-time gift would be extremely helpful as we seek to meet those needs and opportunities. Simply visit SurvivorSupport.net and you will see the link to donate on the homepage. We thank you.